Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're tuning in from around the planet. We are so grateful for you joining us today for our special webinar, Partnerships to End Human Trafficking. My name is Mark Ritchie, and I have the honor of serving as president of Global Minnesota. And I want to thank all of you for being part of our guests today, but I want to especially thank all of our members. Your contributions each year, your memberships make it possible for us to offer webinars and educational programs in our schools, in our communities throughout this year. And especially now that we are in the virtual digital mode, we're able to offer these programs worldwide. So thank you again to our members. And if you're not a member yet, you can join. We would love to have your participation. Just check out our website. Today's program is very special. We have quite an interesting and amazing group of people. And our moderator today is someone I've had the pleasure of working with over this last year. Kelly Gage is a senior philanthropic advisor at the NOMI Network. And she's going to introduce our panel and introduce her work and moderate today's discussion. Thank you again, Kelly, and please take the microphone.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for that introduction. Yes, as Mark said, I'm Kelly Gage. I work for NOMI Network. NOMI Network is an anti-trafficking organization whose mission is to end human trafficking by creating pathways to safe and sustainable employment. We train and develop women and girls, empowering them to break the cycles of slavery in their families and communities. We currently work in India and Cambodia and will launch a site in Dallas in 2021. But my fight against human trafficking did not start with working for NOMI Network. It was actually, has far longer history than that. I was a member of the Carlson Family Foundation board when the family first joined the fight against human trafficking over 20 years ago. And that came with becoming founding members for the World Childhood Foundation, which fights child sexual exploitation around the world. And I've served on the World Childhood Foundation board in Brazil since that time. And with that experience, I was asked to join the NOMI Network board in 2015. I was actually recruited from the board to join the NOMI Network team in 2019, and I left a tenured professor position at St. Kate's to join the fight against human trafficking full time. So I feel like, in speaking to the audience, just know that no matter what vein or track of work you are in right now, you too can join the fight against human trafficking. And so I'd like to start with just thanking all of you, our audience members, and our esteemed speakers today for really joining in this really incredibly important discussion hosted by Global Minnesota. Human trafficking is a multi-billion-dollar industry that has footholds in every country in the world and happens far closer to home than most people realize or really want to acknowledge. It is an incredibly complicated issue that involves human rights, culture, gender, education, politics. I mean, it is so complicated that there isn't one tactic or one agency that will solve this tragedy of human behavior, which is why collaboration and integration of programs and approaches is so critical and really what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm very excited to moderate the conversation today with Imran Ali, Assistant Criminal Division Chief for Washington County, Ágnes Coll, Head of Anti-Trafficking Department, Hungarian Baptist Aid, Paul Krochus, Detective, Woodbury Police Department, and Amy Schroeder, Crime Analyst, Washington County. Welcome to each of you, and again, thank you for being here today. So just to give you a brief outline of how the program is going to run today, we'll start off with each of the panelists taking a few minutes, about 5 minutes each, to briefly describe their work. And then we will move on to a Q&A session. And you, all of the audience, are a part of this discussion and should really jump forward and share their questions that you have as we move through this conversation. So please share your questions via the email address, questions@globalminnesota.com. So questions at global and spelling out Minnesota.com. And we will pose as many questions as possible to our panelists. So I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, and I would like to invite Imran to turn on his video. And again, just reminding everyone to mute themselves or their videos when they are not speaking. So welcome, Imran. Thank you for being here today.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be on this panel. This is a very different time that we're in. We present our group in Washington County, the East Metro. We do lots of presentations every single year for the last 5 years. And it's been really difficult for us really to get our message out during this pandemic. And so we've had to resort to talking to a computer and a microphone. But for all the participants, thank you for logging in. It's something that all of us are very passionate about the work we do. In 2015, I was already working in Washington County in adult felonies. And our elected county attorney wanted to create a unit to focus on certain sorts of crimes that may, larger crimes, but where a prosecutor could work in a multidisciplinary setting with law enforcement, help and aid in the investigation and eventual prosecution. One of the areas he wanted me to focus on was human trafficking. I knew a little bit about it, read about it, never prosecuted a case of human trafficking before that time. And so the first thing I did was I logged in on a website and found a website called Backpage.com. And I started going through it, and I was amazed that there were so many ads that were posted, and it was that easy for somebody to peruse through it, to communicate, and to set up what we call prostitution or commercial sex. Within my first few hours of going on the website, I found a person that I believe to be underage. I did a little bit of research and found out that she indeed was a sophomore in our local high school and was posted on there. And we ended up doing an operation with law enforcement. We recovered her, arrested an individual. And ever since then, back in 2015, that's really been my predominant focus, has been on human trafficking. I really haven't looked back. What we've done in Washington County is we try to do, like I talked about, a multidisciplinary approach to the investigation and prosecution of human trafficking. And what that means is normally when you have law enforcement, they react to crime. They're not proactively out there looking for criminals. Somebody would call 911, they would respond, they would investigate, and then that would be referred to the prosecution. What we wanted to do is we understand that human trafficking, the amount of victim manipulation and all the different intricate details that go with it, we knew that these victims out there were not going to be calling, asking for help, and we would have to do it. And so we assembled a team. We have Amy Schroeder, you'll hear from her in a little bit, and she'll tell you about what she does. She's our criminal analyst. And then we have partners that we've created along the way. We not only have the Washington County Attorney's Office and myself dedicated as a full-time human trafficking prosecutor, one of the only ones in the state, but we also have individuals from the Woodbury Police Department, from Oakdale Police Department, from the Washington County Sheriff's Office, and from the Department of Homeland Security, a senior special agent. We all work together every day. And what we found is that when we work together, the common denominator that is met is that we're able to actually infiltrate the marketplace. We're able to provide aid and recovery to victims, and we're able to hold people accountable. On the prosecution front, I can tell you that in the past 5 years, we've prosecuted labor trafficking cases, the first in the state. We prosecuted multiple large human trafficking rings in the United States. And we've also taken down international global human trafficking rings that have tentacles around the world right here in Washington County. So we've had great success. We've held a lot of people accountable. And then for our victims out there, we've partnered with our regional navigators, shelter providers, And we're learning more as we go through that. We're learning that each of the victims needs some sort of specialized care, whether they're from a different country or whether there's gender issues, whatever it may be. So we're learning more about that as well. But we work together. It's not just us in this office. We have partnerships around the state, and that's really the only way that we can make a change in human trafficking. And we're looking forward to continuing to do it during the pandemic, which has been busy, and after the pandemic. So again, thank you for the opportunity for me to be here, and I'm open to any questions at the time. Thank you.
Before we move on to Ágnes, I would like to correct, I misspoke for the email address. It is questions@globalminnesota.org, not .com, .org, O-R-G. So please submit your questions. So Ágnes, I invite you to share about your work now. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ágnes Coll from Hungarian Baptist State. And in our country, Hungarian Baptist State was the very first, started to work on anti-trafficking. And we started our work in 2003 and opened our shelter for victims of human trafficking. They were women, victims of sexual exploitation. And during this time, ever since, we have built up a global network. We have lots of partners in Western Europe mainly, and also in the US. So we have a close cooperation with the police, means national police, also Interpol and Europol, who we work together. We help them during investigation, and also we are present at the police actions when they capture traffickers. And this is how we go there and help them to have the victims' assistance immediately. We have shelters all around in the country. These are secret safe houses. And we assist not only women, but also men who are victims of domestic servitude or labor trafficking. And we do rehabilitation for them with a group of experts, of course. And then we try to help them reintegrate to the society. And we also have very important work in lobbying in Hungary and in Europe. So our advices is very important for the state, and we have achieved to have a lot of improvement in law and in legislation. So I think ever since we started our work, there has been lots of modification in the penalties. And but still Hungary have a lot to do. But I think in Eastern Europe, we have a very good and strong work against trafficking. And also we have a very big emphasizement on prevention. We go to juvenile correctional centers for teenagers to do prevention work. And we have a lucky occasion to take survivors with us. And they are very effective with them when they talk to them, and they talk there and they share their own stories. And we also go to foster homes and schools all around in the country. And also we train stakeholders and those who are work with trafficking victims. It could be social service providers or prosecutors, judges, police, and so on. So Hungarian Baptist State is one of the leader in Hungary who's working a lot against trafficking. And we are available online as well. And also we have this network, which is available in Hungary and Europe-wide.
Thank you, Ágnes. your work is so important and so firsthand. It's really amazing. So Paul, if you could tell us a little bit about your work and your involvement in the anti-trafficking work.
Yeah, my name is Paul Krochus. I'm a police detective with the city of Woodbury, which is, if you're not, anybody that's not familiar with Woodbury, we are an eastern suburb of Minneapolis, St. Paul. Population is just approaching 80,000. So we're a decent sized suburb, but we're not a ginormous city. So we're kind of a, an average sized suburb. I've been a police officer for 20 years. I've been doing detective work as an assignment since 2009, so about 11 years now. I've done the drug task force. I worked on our street crimes unit, and I started doing that street crimes work in 2013, which was kind of a proactive based unit that our city has for police work. And then in 2015, we kind of partnered, or my position kind of partnered with our county attorney's office when we really started looking at trafficking. Is trafficking an issue? Is it something we need to be looking at? Is it going on in our city? We do have quite a few hotels in our city, but it's not one of those things that a lot of people think of when you think of suburbs. When you historically think of trafficking and commercial sex and prostitution, a lot of times you think of the larger cities, the people with the tracks and the blades and the things that go on in the street. So we started looking at that. I kind of partnered with our county attorney's office and some other law enforcement back in 15. And, we really it was essentially an experimental position where our chief of police said, this is something we should at least look at. We need to see if this is going on in our area. And I was surprised. I think our agency was surprised that it is. And it was actually a lot more prolific than we'd ever really realized before. Unfortunately, human trafficking and sex trafficking is one of those types of crimes that if you're not looking for it, it's very easy to go unnoticed. A lot of victims don't want to identify as a victim, so they're not going to self-report. So those are some of those dynamics that, when we look at proactive policing to get out there, get into the marketplace. What is the marketplace? For a long time, it was Backpage.com. Backpage got shut down. Marketplace was interrupted. And then, wherever there's a supply and demand that something's going to come up, we knew that it would. And, now the online marketplace is back again. So, with our first year in, we had a pretty big case related to labor trafficking of an individual who was brought here from a foreign country, kind of essentially held captive, and forced into a labor situation. And then we had multiple sex trafficking cases that kind of, we worked through, and we realized that this is definitely something that's going on in our community. This is something that, we as a police department want to continue to address. So this has been my full-time assignment now for about 5 years. So it's the only cases that I typically work are, the labor trafficking type of cases and sex trafficking type of cases. So it's been an interesting learning curve. And like I said, when we look at these types of crimes and people don't really want to, report them to us, so we're kind of in that proactive side. And then when we do an operation where we identify a victim, sit down and talk with them, face to face, even in those situations, a lot of times we don't have people that want to cooperate with us. It's unusual when you think of being the victim of a crime. If somebody assaults you, somebody steals something from you, somebody, does something to harm you or a crime against you, the logic says you're going to want to tell the police and say, hey, I need help. I need this person held accountable for what they just did to me. And we found that with a lot of these sex trafficking cases, especially, people wouldn't do that. They would not give us that level of cooperation. So, we have to figure out how are we going to hold somebody accountable for these criminal actions. And a lot of what we do is very heavy forensic based investigations. So, we'll use, a lot of our law enforcement techniques that, we were able to kind of prove a case based on, maybe where cell phones are and who's communicating with who and what is being discussed in those communications and that type of stuff. So we can actually build our case based on that, as well as financial records and the movement of money, because usually you can follow the money in a lot of cases. And that tells you who's kind of in charge and who's running things. So we really kind of adapted our investigations to we kind of consider taking the burden off the victim, so that when we work a case and we do these things, we're able to try to prove it with very minimal burden on that victim statement. So it's been interesting. You know, the COVID stuff has had a little bit of a reaction, I guess, or impact into the demand, you know, at least at first. But, you know, what we're seeing lately is it's coming back too, you know. So I mean, it's one of those marketplace things that never is probably going to go away. So we're just going to keep doing everything we can to impact it, to hold these bad people accountable, and you know, do whatever we can do.
Wow, thank you, Paul. It's always interesting. Well, not interesting isn't the right word. Maybe I'm using that in the Minnesota sense of using the word interesting. It's, you know, hearing about like Backpage and all of these things that have been going on forever, and the shift that we've seen in all of this. It just is bringing all sorts of questions into my mind. So I hope everybody in the audience is having questions come to their mind too, and they're shooting them to the email address. So thank you for your introduction. And Amy, I invite you to tell us a little bit about your work, please.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Amy Schroeder. I'm the criminal analyst with the Washington County Attorney's Office, working with the East Metro Sex Trafficking Task Force. And I first started in January of 2016 in this position. And basically I was tasked with going on the commercial sex websites and kind of scrolling through every single website, kind of see what numbers we were dealing with, how many ads were being posted. And then I would try to ID the victim and then see if I could ID a trafficker while going through the different ads. And we didn't have any like numbers out there, and we wanted to kind of see what we were dealing with how many ads were posted in our area. So in 2016, I went through Backpage.com just in the Twin Cities area in Minnesota, just to see how many ads that there were. So I wanted to see, we thought maybe there would be a few hundred a month. So it would be easy for me to go through every single ad, take information from there, kind of just put them in a database that we were going through and just see what we were dealing with. And just in 2016 alone, just on one of the websites, there was over 74,000 ads that I went through in 2016. And then in 2017, we wanted to see if the number would decrease or increase, because they ended up shutting down the escort section on Backpage.com. So a lot of people thought that trafficking was going away on that website. So we just wanted to see, we knew that it was going to keep going. They were just going to move it to a different spot. So they ended up moving it to like the massage section. So we went through 2017 and the number was over 99,000 ads that I went through in 2017. And then in 2018, Backpage shut down, but there's tons of other websites that we scroll through every single day to look through for the different ads. So we're able to recover the female or male for victim and then arrest the trafficker. So basically what I do is go through all the ads. If I can ID the information, I have a tip that I put together with all the information I can find through open source, social media, things like that. I will put as much information as I can in the tip, and then I will send that off to the law enforcement so they're able to do their investigation, set up like undercover communication and do an operation to just kind of go from there. And then I help out anyway besides that when we get like cell phones back and things like that, if I can help out that way. So that's basically what I do.
I don't think calling what you do basic is the right way to put it. I've talked to many people over the years about the type of work that you do and how difficult it is to have that in front of you on a day-to-day basis. So I'm very thankful for the work that you're doing and appreciate that. I would invite all of our panelists to come back on. We'll start with a few questions that are coming in, and please do keep your questions coming in. One thing I heard both Ágnes and Paul bring this up, but I think they both brought up a really good point in that, we think about, oftentimes when people think about trafficking, they think about sex trafficking and how trafficking is based on, there are many more tenets of the definition of trafficking. So, thinking about that, just even adding that to the complicated nature of this problem, that you are really looking at many different ways that people are being victimized, and the fact that Paul, I think it was you that said that oftentimes the victims don't even look at themselves as victims. They particularly when you're talking about sex trafficking, and oftentimes sex trafficking with minors, that they've really been groomed into thinking that this is a boyfriend situation or someone that they love, and that that this is their free choice in doing this. So, I just think that's far more, that just adds so much more complications to it than we think. So a couple of questions that we have that, again, like most of the attention is given to sex trafficking, but can any of you speak to the fact of how much, we have 3 people from Minnesota, and then we have Ágnes coming from Hungary, so bringing in the perspective from Europe. But thinking about Minnesota, this is a question that's specifically about Minnesota. How much labor trafficking do you feel exists in Minnesota, and how can it be identified and prosecuted more frequently? Anyone want to jump in on that?
I can talk about the prosecution, and Paul or Amy can talk about on the investigation side, and some of that. What I know on labor trafficking, Paul brought me a case, and I'll have him kind of talk a little bit about it. I know he mentioned it very briefly, but it was the first labor trafficking prosecution in the state, and this is laws that have been on the books for decades. And part of the problem with labor trafficking is, number one, it's completely underreported. And so the victims, just like human trafficking, they're out there, but we're able to identify them because they found their avenue, and their avenue now is online. And so we're able to infiltrate that market in a proactive way. Difference with labor trafficking is that what's happening in the factories, what's happening in the construction sector, what's happening in the hospitality industry, we're not able to see that. And oftentimes it takes something like an accident happening. In the case that we worked on, that Paul was a lead detective on, it took somebody escaping their trafficker for us to notice it. But that's one of the biggest issues, I think, with the prosecution side, is that it's not there, so we don't see it. The other issue is that when we do get it, we have a law that is extremely convoluted. Just to understand the definition of debt bondage, for instance, under our statute, which mirrors the federal statute, you have to take a map out and build a rocket ship. I mean, it's really, really difficult. It's easy to understand forced labor. It's easy to understand a provision for, taking somebody's organ, because that's also like a bodily organ. That's also something that's in our statute. But the common one is that debt bondage. And that's really difficult, not only for prosecutors to understand, but eventually for us trying to convince a jury that somebody's guilty of trafficking. And so we're working on that on the prosecution side, and also just on the legislative side, about different ways that we can perhaps either amend the statute legislatively, and also on the awareness side. There's been some really good work in human trafficking on the sex trafficking side in the past 4 or 5 years. I think there needs to be more awareness on the labor trafficking side too. Then Paul and their group of investigators can really do some good work. But that's at least on the prosecution side. That's what I see as a couple obstacles that are in its way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if Ágnes, if you can jump in, and Imran, you just touched on this, but even just how you define somebody who has been labor trafficked, and if somebody would like to, Ágnes or Imran could explain to the audience what debt bondage even is.
So it's different in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. For example, in Austria, if someone is hired for a job for 4 hours, and the person is working for 8 hours for the same money, then it means that this is labor exploitation. And but in Hungary, we have a lot of that. So I could say that in Eastern Europe, we could say that this is half of the nation. So in Hungary, we rather talk about, or in Eastern Europe, we rather talk about forced labor, when someone is forced to work and perhaps taken to abroad, to Western European countries. Very popular is Germany and England and Switzerland and all other places. And the people are taken there, and basically they are living in some kind of very bad conditions, in a mass accommodation, and they don't really receive any money for their work. And there is always a subcontractor who is a Hungarian as well, or whatever nation is the victim is from. So so they are basically not connected to those who are the contractors, because they always just connected to someone who's also Hungarian, or also Czech, or also Slovakian, and so basically there are always the traffickers, and the victims are always from the same country, as an example from Hungary or Eastern Europe. And so it's not really common that that someone would go to abroad and would be a victim of a local trafficker. Mm-hmm. It can happen, but it's not the typical case. And also we talk about the domestic servitude, which means we also call it forced labor, because they're forced to work. And they're forced, meaning they're also beaten and abused for doing whatever is their tasks. And in agriculture or whatever kind of work, and they don't receive money. They only receive food, very little food, and accommodation. And it especially happens at private families. And just to have just an estimation for you, that in Hungary, we had a kind of village or a small town habited by 16,000 people. And we counted 150 victims who are victims of domestic servitude. And we haven't counted those who are victims of sexual exploitation. So this is an example that you can imagine that how often we have these all around in the country. And all the post-communist countries, this is very common. And sometimes these families go to abroad, and they are a subcontractor, for example, mm-hmm. and they make those who work, for example, in a factory. They also make them to be their slave at their household as well. So, and sometimes those who are victims of domestic servitude, sometimes they are also victims of sexual exploitation as well. So it could be a man or could be a woman as well.
Yeah, it's just such an incredibly, and again, I mean, just talking about the complicated nature of the problem. You know, we're talking about partnerships and how important it is for departments to be working together. We have people that are working in police, in investigation, in government, in nonprofits. Can each of you just touch on how have the types of partnerships that you have? I mean, obviously Amy and Paul and Imran work together. Ágnes, I'm sure, working with the shelters, and you talked about, you know, working on pushing through legislation to change laws. Can you, each of you, just kind of talk about like what types of partnerships? I mean, if you're talking about government, in law enforcement, working with nonprofits. Amy, Paul, and Imran, I didn't hear you talk about that at all, and any local nonprofits that you may partner with. So can you just talk a little bit about that, about the partnerships that you have, and how that really supports your work, or what partnerships you'd like to have?
Yeah, I mean, for the law enforcement side, we've developed, partnerships with some of the different non-government advocate groups, here in the metro, as well as some of the shelters. So when we encounter somebody that is in need, and it's sad to say, but there's a lot of people that we will, interact with. Not everybody that's out there doing commercial sex is being trafficked. Some people are just purely independent, and when we deal with these situations, sometimes we end up finding the people that are, we call it survival sex. So they are selling themselves. They're, doing the act of prostitution, whether it be in a hotel or wherever, but a lot of times it's just simply to make enough money to have a place to stay. And they're kind of stuck. They don't know really what else to do to generate money, and they end up in this environment. So we try to, have those partnerships in place, which we've already established, so that if we do interact with somebody that's their situation, we can, at least offer those, and say, look, you may not want to tell everything to me because I'm, a police officer. People don't always like to tell their life stories to the police. But, here's an advocate, somebody that's, more trained in that side of it to, kind of help work people through, look at different programs that can maybe help them get into, and then housing, for emergency housing placement. So if we can, as law enforcement, help connect a person that is in a really bad situation into a place where they, have those basic needs met with food and shelter, a safe place to sleep, that's sometimes a start. So, we've worked on those for, the last several years, building those relationships up, and we do have some partnerships with different shelters through the metro and some of the different NGO groups for advocates, and we're very lucky that, those individuals that work for those advocate groups are willing to come out. Sometimes if we have a planned operation, we'll let them know ahead of time, and sometimes they'll just come right with us, where they're there just right away, and we'll have our conversation from the law enforcement side to see what the situation is. And then sometimes we'll step out and we'll walk away, and we'll let that advocate, without us there, have maybe a more honest conversation with what can they do to help this person get out of this situation. Our approach for, when we do these cases is at least an initial assumption that nobody really wants to, nobody grows up wanting to do commercial sex. That's not a childhood dream of anybody. There's different circumstances as to why people end up in that line of work, in those environments and in those situations. But our at least initial approach when we encounter any of these individuals is to make at least an initial assumption that they're potentially a victim of trafficking. So we kind of start there. Not that at some point people aren't held accountable for those acts if they're not being trafficked, but if somebody's obviously being trafficked, there is not charges that we're going to be looking to pursue. So because that's always looming though, it's nice that we can have those advocates on site where I, as the police, can step out, I can walk away, and then, some maybe more honest conversations can happen and try to get a person plugged into where they need to be.
I think that's a really good point, that nobody has this in their list of career paths that they're looking to go into, and so really taking that approach with that. We have a lot of questions that are coming through on here, so if anyone else wants to tie some of that question into their other answers, but I'd like to ask a couple of things for everybody, I guess, within this, in terms of Ágnes, you talked, oh no, yes, it was Ágnes that I think talked about going into, or Amy, oh gosh, no, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on this now. it was mentioned that going in and talking to people in the foster care systems, it was Ágnes that was talking about this and really educating people. So when you're thinking about stopping the demand, I mean, like what is happening in that regard? Because this is something that, you know, Imran, you mentioned talking about that there are international cases here. So there are people that are coming in from other countries. So the demand is domestic, but the source is international. Amy, you talked about that also, and Ágnes, you talked about the fact that there are people from Hungary being trafficked into Western European countries. So there's this localized demand and international demand and international and domestic victims. So can you talk a little bit about that, about what's happening on the stopping of the demand side?
So, you're absolutely right. I think that, you know, early on when we started doing this, we knew that if you take the demand piece away or you curtail the demand, you're going to have a reduction in what the supply is. Human trafficking, commercial sex is like any other economic thing. It's a supply demand. And so very, very early on, we started with the first ones in the state to do underage prostitution stings. Where Paul is undercover detective, for instance, and he would communicate. Amy would post an ad, not of herself, of someone else, and then we would figure out what the demand is, and people would text, and then they would end up, if they showed up, to be arrested. And I can tell you, I've prosecuted hundreds and hundreds of those people. As much as I would love to say that it's made an impact, I don't know if it has. I think it's continuing to do those sorts of operations. COVID has definitely limited and curtailed us for the last several months of doing those sorts of operations, but we've done a lot of those. And we've realized that demand, it's strong, it's there. And what do we do about it? And one of the things that we're doing in Washington County is that, I can't prosecute my way out of the problem. I can prosecute somebody for, in our statute, prostitution, but is that really going to change their mindset? And I don't think it is. And we can look at anecdotal evidence of people that have been convicted of prostitution multiple times on the patron side. They'll do it again because the consequence really isn't significant. And so myself, Amy, and a few other people, we actually testified at our legislature a few years ago on increasing some of the demand increasing some of the penalties and making it an enhanceable crime. Where if you do it once, it may be a misdemeanor, you do it again, it may be upped, and then you do it again, and it potentially could be a felony. Again, not wanting to prosecute our way out of it, but trying to find a solution, because unless we do that, we're going to continue to see not only the domestic supply increase, that demand for the supply, but I think one of Paul's big expertise is really on that international side. It's the international demand for that supply that's prolific in Minnesota, and that demand is there, and it's there on a significant daily basis. As we speak, it's being run all over the state. So those are some things that we've worked on.
Absolutely. And I'd like to, segue into that and maybe ask Amy and Ágnes to both speak to this to get the two different perspectives. But in thinking about not thinking about how are traffickers getting their victims? How are they accessing them? I know in India and Cambodia how that's happening, and I have quite a bit of domestic knowledge, but I'd like both of you to speak to that, or each of you to speak to that.
So I know, in Minnesota and what we see around here, a lot of people think, just from what they see online and stuff, that people are being kidnapped and forced into it. And a lot of the ones that we see are more either family members or their boyfriend or girlfriend or a spouse that gets them into it. So they basically the victim is really vulnerable and they just feel down about themselves, and the trafficker will show them love and just spoil them and do all that kind of stuff, and then start posting them up on ads. That's what we've seen a lot in this area. So they're usually someone that they know and someone that they trust and someone that has shown them love, and they think that that's what it is.
Okay, so one thing I would like to say is also we have the, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so we have similar kind of recruitment systems like this Loverboy system and such what she just said, and but also we have this experience that those who had physical or sexual abuse under the age of 12, they are more likely to become a victim of exploitation, mainly sexual exploitation. But all those who are others and becoming a victim, they also have this background. And also the problem is that that there is a society which is still blaming the victim, and they don't have. So we cannot stop doing awareness raising and educate society. What is the background of these people, and they are victims, and how this whole thing happens, and the stories of the victims, because the society is cruel and really blaming the victims. So I don't think that there are much differences in between the recruitment system, like in the US or in Hungary or in other places, because this is about looking for love, looking for just to be attached to someone, just to have some family, to have some kind of cherishment. And also there is economical reason, looking for a better life and looking for just a better way of living, to send money back home, and just to, you know, to show that or to dream about a better way of life. And people always think that this is somewhere in the Western side of the world, that where they can live better.
I would completely concur with that, Ágnes, that the means of traffickers getting their victims is, there are definitely some commonalities around the globe, and they are just that. I mean, looking at affection and economics, and a lot of it has to do with economic access, and particularly for women around the world, and for men too, in terms of labor trafficking. The idea of people being groomed to go into it, the mention of it often happening within families, that it is a family member that is trafficking another family member. That's quite common, particularly in the groups of women and girls that we work with in India. And you know, one of the reasons that we do the work that we do is that we are a workforce development agency. We educate people, we educate the women, and give them job skills and place them in jobs, find them jobs that give them those economic opportunities to keep themselves from being victims. But it is something that is, it is not an instantaneous decision or something that happened. I mean, Ágnes, you mentioned children being victims, and the runaways, the foster care system. You know, there are so many segments of population, particularly when you're talking about underage boys and girls, that give them far more heightened risk factors to draw them into the highlights, or the headlights, I guess I say, of a trafficker. So it is many different ways that you need to look at it, but some great commonalities as we're looking around the world.
Just one more thing I would like to add, that this is the generations repeating themselves. So the parents are also coming from dysfunctional families, and coming from foster care, and so not only the children. So we really have this kind of goal that we have to educate the families together. We have to educate the parents about sexuality, and about how to love their kids, because they're just mix sexuality and love, and this is really just messed up in these families, that that, you know, that partnership is not with the parents and not with the relatives, physical partnership, for example. So this is, I think, and also an important thing in the third world countries, also not only in the post-communist countries.
Yes, that is very, very true. I'm curious, I'm just trying to think who might be able to speak to this best. Maybe Paul, I'll ask you, what tools, or Amy also in the work that you do with being online, what tools, both technology and otherwise, have you found most impactful in your work against human trafficking?
That's tough.
I didn't mean to ask a tough question.
It's kind of everything. I mean, when we go through and you know, when we do our cases, I don't want to give away all our law enforcement trade secrets, but we do have resources that help us, you know, track phone locations. You know, we in my cases, you know, and I've done investigations for a very long time. I've never written as many search warrants as I write with these cases. You know, I have a case that I wrapped up not that long ago that, you know, by the time it was done, it was north of 50 legal processes with search warrants and court orders and stuff like that that were through the case. You know, so we write these legal demands to, you know, obtain information from, you know, different, you know, whether it's social media, Google accounts, cell phone records, you know, all that type of stuff that is out there, that anything that you do online, any communication that you have, any interface you have with a piece of technology, whether it's a cell phone or a computer, is going to leave a footprint. I think most people know that. And what we do is, you know, we go after what that footprint is and what picture does that footprint paint. You know, whether it's, you know, social media stuff, whether it is, you know, those phone records and what cell phone towers is the phone, you know, pinging off of. Does that show associations between when person A and person B were together doing this act or whatever? You know, so it's really, if you think of technology and how great it's been to, you know, the ease of access to information, you know, that information also leaves the footprint that, you know, we as law enforcement are able to, you know, go after to build these cases up and to, you know, hold these people accountable for it. I do want to chime in one more thing with your last topic. You know, that boyfriend relationship is one of the most prevalent ones, 100%. What was missed is the drug dealer relationship, and we see that a lot. So what we see there is you have your, you know, especially with the heroin epidemic that's kind of resurfaced, you know, the kids that are experimenting with the pills that they find in mom and dad's medicine cabinet that didn't get thrown away or disposed of properly, you know, turns into that addiction, supply and demand. Turns out heroin's easier to get and cheaper to get than some of the pills are. And then once that individual has suffered all the way down, kind of hit those low points where maybe they're kicked out of the house, they are in a sense homeless, you know, maybe they've lost their job, things have gone downhill. Those drug dealers can sometimes shift into that trafficker role, and that it's all about control. And those drug dealers, we see it where they will hold just, I'll give you just enough of this drug so that you don't get dope sick. If you don't do what I want, then you're going to be dope sick. And it's that control through the drug. You can't buy from anybody but me. If you do buy from someone else, then there's going to be a physical assault that goes with it. You know, so there's that element of the control that we do see a lot as well. Sorry, I backtracked on you.
No, that's also important to consider. And unfortunately, we're coming to the close of our Q&A, but I will ask, Amy, I'll ask you to jump in. Because I feel like we can only have one person answer this question, but, you know, importantly, what can citizens do? What can the people that are listening do to volunteer or engage to help end human trafficking?
So we get that question a lot when we do trainings. We do a lot of trainings out in the community as much as we can just to make people more aware, because people don't realize what's actually happening until they hear it from a training, or they don't realize it's happening around them. So just watching for certain things, like if someone's acting weird, or if someone has an older boyfriend that has all the money and all that stuff and they think that there's something wrong. It's almost like, we always tell people, if you have a gut feeling with something, you can call and just say something, because if you don't, something might end up going wrong. So we have a thing that we are doing where it's speakuptheycan't.org. And it's a website that just has information. And there's also a lot of information on polarisproject.org.
Yes.
Really good website. That is a great website with a bunch of information, a hotline for people to call if they have any information on something. Just things like that. Just getting it out there, making people more aware is one of the main things.
Yeah, Polaris is a great organization to mention. They run the National Trafficking Hotline and do some incredible research work also. So definitely a resource to look at. You know, and if you want to know any more about like international trafficking, or particularly in East Asia, because that is where a large percentage of trafficking victims are, you can look at the NOMI Network website, which is nominetwork.org. IJM is another organization that can be looked at for information. But I feel like we could just keep talking and talking and talking. You guys all have such amazing depth of information and experience, and I hope the audience has heard something that really resonates with them, and that they will reach out to me, to any of our panelists, to Global Minnesota, to learn more about the fight against human trafficking. It really is going to take absolutely everybody that is here today and beyond to end this. So we just really like to thank each of you, Imran, Amy, Paul, Ágnes. Thank you so much for your time and for your work. It's not easy. I mean, I sit on the fundraising side, and yes, I engage with the women when I'm in Cambodia or in India, and seeing the way they live is really, really tough. But you guys are there on the front lines, and I'm just thank you from the bottom of my heart, you know, for taking your time today, but also for the work that you do. So, and thank you everybody for putting your questions in. I wish we had been able to get to all of them. So again, don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions individually also, but I will just sign off for now and turn things over to Mark to wrap things up. But thank you all for being here today.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and to all our panelists. And all of you underline the real message of today is that it is about partnership. It takes all of us. It takes a village. It takes a global village. So thank you again. And for all who tuned in today, you have contacts. You can make contact with different individuals here and on the Global Minnesota webpage. Again, Carlson Family Foundation was really important, and all of you who are members are really important to making this kind of programming possible, to make it available free on a global basis. So thank you again. There are 3 more public events, educational events coming up. Tomorrow, 10 to 11 in the morning, there's a book club discussion about Thomas Friedman's book, Thank You for Being Late. Some of you know of him as a columnist from the New York Times from St. Louis Park. On the 28th at 6 p.m., one of our global conversations on U.S.-Russia relations, returning guest Jill Doherty is one of the most amazing analysts and kind of person with an overview and a long historical view. So that's another great one to tune in for. Again, these end up on our YouTube page, so you can see them again, send them around to your friends and family, or if you miss them, you can catch them on the YouTube channel. And then finally, on October 30th, we're looking at a noon program. We're looking at the new African Free Trade Area. It's a new continental-wide free trade area, and that is a very important policy change that has impacts. Many of the new diaspora communities in Minnesota are connected directly to countries in Africa where they came from or their families, but we're seeing that there's high interest in how can we be partnering in various ways with our colleagues and friends and others on the other side of the planet, and how does this change in the free trade area, the continental free trade area, create new opportunities for Minnesotans and new opportunities for Africa. So again, thank you to all who've tuned in. Thank you to Carolina and Tim who helped put this together, and Olaf, the team behind. And thank you to Kelly and all of our panelists for bringing us into a new conversation, showing us by your actions and your stories, your humanity, your passion, your devotion to partnerships. And we look forward to the next opportunity to continue this conversation. Good day, everybody.